He is the Pocket Square Professor, and you'll learn all about the cloud. So listen as he teaches technology. He is the Pocket Square Professor.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our last section here. This is around compliance overall. Now, this is a big topic, and there's a lot of stuff in this particular section here, so we want to make sure that we cover it as best as we can. Just also keep in mind that compliance as a whole, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. However, it's important to understand as well that the information covered in this particular topic is vast, and it also can get very, very, very complicated. So again, this is a beginner section of it. I'm going to do my best to go over it without diving too far into the complexities, because as I said, it can get very, very complex. This is something I am dealing with in day-to-day, all the time. This is all I actually deal with nowadays. It is a very, very important thing for every organization. So let's dive in here. So we're going to give a high-level overview of compliance. Now, in this instance here, what do we mean by compliance? Well, the Purview Compliance Center. So this is Microsoft, and Microsoft says that compliance means a lot of different things, but let's truly define compliance. So the Purview Compliance Center is an admin center that allows an organization, let me move myself here, looks like there we go, allows an organization to monitor, protect, and discover sensitive data inside of locations on premises and in the cloud. Now this is a definition that I have created. However, I think it paints the picture, but there's still a lot of pieces in here, such as what exactly is sensitive data? That is the million-dollar question. What is sensitive to one business may not be sensitive to another. A lot of things that come into play around these types of conversations here are industry verticals. Healthcare has a very interesting set of compliance requirements, much different than manufacturing, which is much different than banking or finance. There's so many different ways that you got to look at it here. I'm going to be broad in this topic here, but I will give you some examples as we go through. So, really, if we start looking at it as a whole here, what does compliance mean in the business world? I have a definition on here that is I think paints a little bit better of a picture here and gives you a little bit more understanding of it. So I got the reference here attached for you as well. Is that the definition of compliance is the action of complying with a command or the state of meeting rules or standards. In the corporate world is defined as the process of making sure your company and employees follow all laws, regulations, standards, and ethical practices that apply to your organization and industry. Now it's quite a mouthful, okay? But looking at it as a whole, let's break down a couple of these parts here. So the process of making sure your company employees follow the law, regulations, standards, and ethical practices. So laws are huge, and anybody who's ever had any kind of dealing with, lawyers or any of that profession there, you know that it is very complex and it's a different type of world. So when we're looking at laws and regulations, this is a big deal. And as I said, kind of put it towards your industry vertical. Think of yourself as a hospital. I work at a hospital. Well, what kind of laws and regulations do we have? Well, there's several. We have a lot of these organizations, as well as industry verticals. They have their named type laws that they have to worry about. One of which is HIPAA, the Health Information Protection Privacy Act. That's a big deal. PII is another. There's so many different buzzwords that we'll go through in here, of course. PII, personally identifiable information, credit card numbers, social security numbers, FERPA, which is a education standard. Then we also have GLBA or GLBA, which is a banking or finance standard. Again, there's so many different standards that you have to look at. ISO, they are also as well, International Standards Organization. And then it also comes along the idea, and this is another piece here that you got to think, are ethical practices. Ethics is kind of a forgotten thing nowadays, and I feel kind of sad saying that, but it is true. Ethics really, when we're looking at compliance and business ethics, there are pieces in here that allow us as an organization to be able to discover our data, and we'll have a little more discussion as it goes through, of course. But again, overall, it's just making sure that you follow laws, regulations, standards, as well as ethical practices. for your organization. That is the big piece of it. And that is really what compliance means in the business world. Now, what is the purpose of maintaining it? Well, this is a fantastic discussion here. So I pulled some statistics. And all of these here are very big, and these are actually pretty modern at their time of recording. They're pretty modern, I would say, in the past few years. We're hearing things all the time in terms of data breaches and all of those things, which, yes, security is involved, which is why a lot of times when we talk about compliance, we also, talk about security. Now, actually, I add a third piece on there, and something that I call just colloquial SCAG, or SCG, security, compliance, and governance. Now, governance is a big piece as well, but again, security, compliance, and governance all have a hand in this, and they're all a big part of this even bigger piece of overall, making sure that we're following laws and regulations and such. But the purpose of maintaining the compliance, let's look at some statistics that'll paint a little bit better of a picture. So there's a couple on here, these three, and again, I've pulled these, got the reference located inside of here as well, where we are saying inside of here, 47% increase in data breaches since 2020. Again, this is just as of recording this here, this is 2 years ago. So here's the problem, is this is things that we need to look at as well. Now just look at this first one on here. Is there a common misconception? Is that data loss occurs mainly from malicious attackers. That is actually not true. It's very interesting. We'll see this here. External breaches still account for over half, sure. However, internal data breaches are also important to include in this because they're increasing a lot. And really, when you look at it, they're not from outsiders, but they're from negligent or disgruntled employees. Now, negligent is probably the biggest piece. Most people are not maliciously doing this. However, there are some. Don't get me wrong, there are some. However, when we're looking at negligence, this is just, I didn't know, I was just unaware, I didn't realize I couldn't copy the entirety of this SharePoint site to my personal computer and take it. I didn't know I can do that. Well, again, did we have a corporate compliance policy? Did you have training on that? Well, again, that's a big deal here, but we're looking at very large increases in data breaches of any sort, external or internal. 84% of IT leaders say DLP, and that stands for data loss prevention or data loss protection, is more difficult with a remote workforce. Modern workplace, remember, legacy workplaces here, when we're trying to funnel everything in through that network, the on-premise network where we have to funnel everything in through, this is a big deal, and this is around that big bugaboo. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this, and I have worked with organizations that have this and that mysterious thing called shadow IT. Very big scenarios that we have to look at here. When we are working from home, and this happened very much in 2020, when everybody was working from home, problems we ran into here is a lot of organizations were not ready to be able to be productive from home. Yes, I can't tell you how many organizations I worked with to enable Teams from just a meeting and kind of collaboration status. But that's not all Teams does. And if you haven't seen, I do recommend you go and check out my section that I have on the productivity suite inside of Office 365, which includes a very big section on Teams. But again, the idea here is that if I don't have an easy way of being able to, if the company doesn't provide me with an easy way to be able to do my job, I'm going to find other ways to do it. And those other ways are going to be shadow IT, my personal Dropbox, my personal OneDrive, my personal Google Drive, whatever. Very, very big. And look at that number. 84% of them say it's difficult. Well, again, everything we have talked about so far in this entirety of this course here, this boot camp that we have discussed, is really all around the idea of enabling the modern workplace here, which this right here, this particular section, can be completely, nixed if you do it right. 60 to 70% of all data breaches warrant public disclosure. This is a big deal. I'm sure we have all been named in some sort of data leakage. Where it happened not too long ago with Facebook and Cambridge Analytics, where, they had data on people and they were breached, and that data leaked and it caused a lot of problems. There are also other reasons. A lot of times what happens are the credit reporting bureaus and such. They do that too. And hey, when that happens, that hey, you have a legal obligation to disclose that. And that could be very, very pricey. I've had conversations with head legal counsels for organizations, and my question always to them is that if this type of data were to leave the organization, well, what would happen? And all of them are like, it would be bad. So I'll just sum it up for you. It would be bad. So if it were to leave the organization maliciously, what would you have to do? Well, a lot of times you have to disclose it publicly. Public disclosure, when that happens, it's not necessarily bad and from a technical point, or really, it's really from a trust standpoint. People no longer trust putting their entrusting you with their data or their analytics, whatever it may be. Hey, it's my personal stuff. Hey, whether it be from, again, from like Facebook or something like that, is that, we have our data around us as people. So again, and it has a financial impact. So again, very big deal. There's actually more on this one here, so I do recommend that you check it out. There's a lot of information in that particular reference link there. So now we've kind of determined why we care about this and what's the purpose of maintaining compliance. Well, again, legal entities as well as financial impact as well as kind of brand problems, all of these really come into play here. So we really need to understand that really at the end of the day, we have to be very, very secure with how we handle other people's data. Looking at for instance, like, we're not even talking necessarily about other locations. So generally, is inside of the United States, and that's fine. But inside of the United States, there's several of them. There's the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. We have to follow those, as well as New York has one. I suspect more will follow suit, where if you are holding data about a potential customer, or, if you're in kind of the, we'll just say, e-commerce space there, and you're holding data about people, you got to make sure that you do different things with them. There's a lot that goes along with this. This is privacy. This is a huge factor, but it's all around data. Okay. So before we jump into the other sections here, we need to understand the various states of data. Okay. So data, it comes in many different states. And what do I mean by states? Well, there's three that we're going to really focus on here. There's data in transit, or data in motion. This is another common thing here, is that when data is going from point A to point B, and whatever medium that may be through, whether it be through an email, through a Teams message, through a, wherever, okay, that is the data secure? Is it encrypted? Is it X, Y, Z? Who knows? This is just a state of data. That's all. As it's leaving the organization going from point A to point B. That's all data in transit is. Data at rest. So wherever data at rest is, if it's stored, for instance, where, it's stored on a USB drive, well, is that a secure method? Well, who knows? Based off of our compliance policy, we say that all data at rest must be encrypted. Okay. Well, obviously, if you're putting it on a USB drive, it may not be encrypted. Maybe now we have to worry about using BitLocker to encrypt our data USB drives, whatever it may be. So again, it's around the idea of that the data is at rest. Okay, is that, hey, we've created the data, we've stored the data here, and we have the data inside of a SharePoint site or inside of Exchange. If it's in your mailbox, that's all at rest because it's really not any one of these three. So it's data in transit, data at rest, and then finally data in use. Now this is a unique one here. Is that data in use is really around the idea, exactly as the name implies, data in use, as I'm using the data. As I'm generating knowledge, this is a state of data which we can protect. And this is something that is very unique to Microsoft. Data in use, as I'm generating information. Let's just say I'm creating a document and it has a sensitive piece of information in it. Very easy sensitive piece of information is it has a social security number in it. All right, it is not in motion, it's not in rest, it's in use. So as I am typing it out and I have a social security number in it, I can do different things to that piece of data. I can use potentially a DLP policy to say, hey, if you send this out, you can't send it out because it has sensitive information in it. Or I could also do something like an encryption policy where as I'm typing in that social security number, poof, it pops up and it says, hey, we're going to encrypt this document because it has a sensitive piece of information in it. So this is a unique one to Microsoft. It's not, I guess, solely unique. There are other players out there that certainly can do this. However, they focus heavily on the data in transit and the data at rest. All right, now that we looked at the data states, there's several things here that I want to look at as well. So what are sensitive information types and classifications? Now we're going to talk a little bit more about classifications when we get to the information protection side here, but I'm just going to kind of plant some of those seeds for you. So we look at it here. So we have public, confidential, highly confidential, and top secret. So this is one way of classifying data. Okay, now we got to think about it. We're generating knowledge all the time. All right. And these right here are, I would say, a little bit more difficult to kind of comprehend, because when you define this, data classifications as a whole, is that I'm creating a document here, and the purpose of this document is what? Well, if it's to contain customer information, my customers, and I'm working with it, then maybe that should be confidential or highly confidential. Or what about this document that I'm generating that is very specific to a merger or an acquisition, let's just say, and that nobody else should really be able to see it, but again, maybe that should be a top secret level one. So this is a very broad brushstroke here, and this is what's referred to as a folksonomy, and it could be, you can also kind of consider it a taxonomy, but these are really, you can call them whatever you want. And again, a chair is a chair and a goose is a goose, but everybody knows what those things are. However, not everybody knows what public is, because something public to one company is not completely public to another company. Same thing with confidential or highly confidential. It's different from folk to folk, which is why it's called a folksonomy. Now, with that being said, this is a very interesting concept here, because this brings in a whole new conversation around the idea of, how are we going to classify our data? Well, again, what is sensitive and what is, these types of classifications? Well, we have other ways of being able to classify data. We have our traditional pattern-based. Now, these are ones that you may or may not have seen, but these are going to be patterns that we can pick up. And what I mean by that is that they're going to have specific, whether numeric patterns, or they'll have specific words in them that are pattern-based. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Social Security number. So all of that, everyone who has a United States Social Security number, obviously there's Social Security numbers for tons and tons and tons of organizations out there, not organizations, countries, and there's tons of different those patterns out there of Social Security numbers. However, they're all going to fit the same. Everybody in the U.S. has a same sequencing of a Social Security number. So what we can do is we can be very specific around that, is that we can find data while it's at rest, while it's in use, while it's in motion, that has Social Security numbers in it. And we can look through these. These are through essentially what's referred to as a regular expression, which is a specific pattern. Okay, that's all we're really looking for here. What are some other ones? Credit card number, bank account number, international tax identification number, ITIN. So there's a couple examples. There's a whole bunch, actually. We're going to look at that when we get into the lab here for this particular section of what the other pattern-based other pattern-based sensitive information types are. So sensitive information types, you may also hear me refer to them as SITs, which just stands for sensitive information type. So gotta love the acronyms. There's a lot of them here. So, but again, a Social Security number, credit card number, bank account. These are going to be very, very specific to a pattern. But a Social Security number is the same no matter which organization you go to, whichever, if you're in the side of the country there, we have a very similar one. We may have different patterns, yes, from country to country, but they all follow within inside of that area. They have a specific type of pattern. Now, we also have non-pattern. So these are a little bit more difficult, and this is where Microsoft really is making a ton of push through. So Microsoft is using SharePoint syntax through being able to classify data and find it based off of, well, lots of different things. Let me give you an example. HR. What is an HR document, really? Try to explain what an HR document is to a computer. It's It's very difficult to do that. There are no patterns per se when we're dealing with HR. They have tones to them, meaning that they will have specific verbiage in them. They will have, maybe employee ID numbers potentially. But again, employee ID number could be a pattern, absolutely, no doubt about it. But every organization probably has a different employee ID number. So how do we specify that? Well, we can't really have global ones, but we can make our own. Now, HR, what is an HR document? As I said, who knows, really? But we all know that if we were to see a document that says HR or that has HR stuff in it, we would know that that is an HR document. Well, when we're looking inside of Office 365, Microsoft uses AI to be able to analyze documents, and we can do pictures, we can do everything in there to be able to look at, hey, what kind of information is this? And this is through what's called a trainable classifier. And these are really a very powerful thing here. I'll give you a couple other examples. Finance. What's a finance document? Again, yeah, probably has got numbers. It could be a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet. Generally, that's what finance people work with. So it's probably going to have a spreadsheet. And yeah, maybe it has, again, it has the word budgeted in, and it has other things in it, and it has this and this and this, and it looks through a whole big thing. But the AI, the algorithm, is looking through it, and it's saying, okay, well, based off of all of these pieces we find, here's a confidence level that we think that this is a finance document. Here's the cool part about it. These are all trainable, meaning they're trainables. They have trainable classifiers. They are trainable, which means that as it detects things, it can get smarter. Finance, IT. What's an IT document? Again, we don't know exactly. It's very difficult to kind of put your finger on it and define it. But again, every organization's a little bit different when they terms of, what is IT, a document, what is a finance document, and such. Well, when it comes down to it, these trainable classifiers have the ability to be able to look at different non-pattern based messages. They could be, again, emails. They could be anything. There's a whole bunch of different ones. These are a very, very big thing. So here's sensitive information types and data classifications at a kind of high level. So with all that being said, this is a lot of stuff. So what do we do with it? Well, just figuring out what it is, that's one thing, but figuring out what we want to do with it and what is specific to us. Do we care about Social Security numbers? Yeah, I can say almost every organization in the U.S. Especially probably cares about Social Security numbers. But does every organization deal with bank account numbers? Probably most to some degree, but again, not more than others. What about banks? Banks deal with bank account numbers all the time. I mean, all the time they're dealing with bank account numbers. But let's just say, a mom and pop shoe shop, they probably don't really care too much about bank account numbers, but they may be paying accounts payable or some specific location inside of their organization may care about bank numbers. Same thing with ITIN. Maybe HR deals a little bit with it. A little bit, but again, who knows? And that's really what we got to look at here, is that the vertical is very important as well. So we've looked at the types and the classifications. We're going to look at these far more in depth when we jump into the portal, of course. But if we look at it right now, the next question really is, and this is probably the last question of this particular discussion here, is who classifies the data? Yes, this is a technical concept, but data classifications and protections are not solely the job of IT in a business, okay? This is a big deal. This is something which when I consult with my companies here is I very much stress the fact that IT should not be designing these rules. IT should say, here's everything that it can do. You, as lots of different types of people should be involved in this, lawyers, officers in the company. This is traditionally the job of a CIO, potentially a CISO. A CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer, as well as a Chief Compliance Officer if they have them. Compliance people generally do this. Lawyers, as I said, high-level people, as well as IT, should be all at the table discussing this. Okay? Looking at that, what are some other ones? Again, legal, of course, executives. Chief Privacy Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, Chief Information Officer, again, corporate compliance. A lot of organizations will have a specific department around corporate compliance. And generally you start seeing these here in the larger the company, but also the more specific to an industry vertical. Almost every bank has some sort of compliance, corporate compliance department of some sort. HR. Yeah, absolutely. HR should be. HR comes into play here as there are also ones that come around the idea of protections. You know, hey, this should be protected. This shouldn't be protected. What happens if somebody breaks these policies? What do we do? HR is involved in this. And finally, InfoSec. And this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. This is just a list of some. I've seen many different ones that come to the table here, but this is the group decision here. This is a board of people. I've seen compliance boards or governance boards that decide these things. And that's really when it comes down to it, is that, you know, I would serve on the board for an intermediate or help a customer of mine create a governance or compliance board, and then kind of pass them off on this so they can start rolling and running with this on their own. So again, who's classifying the data and who's protecting the data? Again, a larger people, not just IT. And that's the big piece that I want you to understand out of this here. All right, so that's it for this particular lecture here. We're going to jump into the lab here. We're going to look at the Compliance Purview Center, or the Purview Compliance Center, I don't know, whatever it's called nowadays. It's changed its name several times in the past couple months. But we're going to jump into the Compliance Center there, and we're going to start looking through these data classifications, all of the sensitive information types, and all of that. We're going to look at those a little bit more in depth, and then we'll continue on the discussion. Thank you for jumping on this one here. We'll see you over on the next one.